probably noticed already we've switched some things a little bit on Sunday night. I don't know why, maybe just to be more succinct, but we started with a song like we do on Sunday mornings. Actually, this may lead to some awkwardness at the end, but the other change that we are making is, I don't remember what elder is leading our special prayer tonight. Is that Jack? Okay. So Jack will lead our prayer for our sick, and after that, Dave will lead a song, and that's it. So we'll have a prayer and then a song, not another prayer. So when you get done singing, you can stand and look at each other awkwardly, or you can make your way down to the fellowship room. I hope those changes don't confuse us too much. You know, many of you know I grew up in northeast Arkansas. I actually grew up about 9 miles from the Missouri Boot Hill. And then when I got into preaching full-time, I kind of did the reverse. I moved into southwest Missouri about 15 miles from the Arkansas border. And the area of northwest Arkansas that I live close to, Rogers, Fayetteville, Springdale, that area, is a booming area, much like a metropolitan area now. And it's one of those places where you cannot tell where one place begins and ends and the next one picks up. So at 1 minute you're in Rogers, and then without even realizing it, you're in Bentonville, and then you're in Fayetteville, you're in Springdale. I mean, there's all these different towns, and they all run together. There's no clear line of demarcation. Probably doesn't matter what town you're in, really, because they're all about the same. They all have the same things, but they all run together. Kind of like in the Dallas area. Sometimes it's hard to tell where you're at and where you've come from. And I think sometimes, sadly, that's how the church is. That it's hard to tell where the world stops and the church begins, or where the church begins and the world stops. I mean, it's one of those things where there's not a clear line of demarcation, that there's a blending. You know, it's always been the case that whatever is the cultural standard tends to kind of bleed over into the church. Whatever's going on in our culture around us, if it's a movement, it tends to kind of move its way into the church if we're not careful. And certainly we see that in this day and age. We see so many things in our world that are making their way into the church to where there's kind of a blending of the two, and it's almost hard to tell what the difference is. And it kind of brings me to a question, and that is, are we making a difference? Is the church at Oldham Lane making a difference? Maybe I'm biased, but I think we are. But that's a question that keeps me awake at night sometimes. It's a question that I really ponder. Are we truly making a difference? Y'all, think there are many churches throughout our world who are making a great difference for the kingdom. They're doing many great things, accomplishing magnificent things. Are we? Are we making a difference in our community? Are we, the people who make up the church, are we individually making a difference in the world around us? Or are we trying to have 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the church? Are we straddling the fence? Is that line blurred? Is there a clear line of demarcation between the church and the society that surrounds us? Is there any doubt that this world is exerting tremendous influence upon the church and upon Christians? I mean, there's this call to conformity. There's this pressure to conform with the world around us. Now, as much as ever, we have the world pressing in on the church, making certain demands even, or threats against the church. Of course, we're going to have to protect and defend what we have. Far too many Christians, I think, have decided that it's not worth the fight. That instead of doing battling for our distinctiveness, they've embraced the world's policies. And so they may be making a difference, but it's a negative one. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the Apostle Paul talks about love in its highest form. It's agape love. And within that definition and description of real love, he says that love never fails. And he's right. Who am I to disagree with Paul? He's definitely right. Love never fails, at least agape love does not. But there is a kind of love that always fails. There is a kind of love that God even hates. And let me read about it. 1 John 2, starting in verse 15. Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lust, but the one who does the will of God lives forever. Now, at first reading, you may be thinking to yourself, so what's the deal? I can't love my life? I mean, why can't I love the world? There's a lot of great things in this world, right? I mean, I, for one, am a person who loves this world. I love my life. I love the Oldham Lane Church of Christ. I love my job here. I love you people. I love my wife. I love my family. I've got a great life. I can't love that? Plus, I mean, if you think about that, and if you're reading it the way that many people read it at first glance, is God not contradicting himself in his word? For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with gratitude, as Paul told Timothy. Didn't James say every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no shifting shadow? Why should I not love the world when it says that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son? Obviously, there's a distinction that needs to be made, right? A distinction between the world that John is talking about here and the world that we often think of when we read a passage like this. In ancient thought, it was common to see the world in terms of conflicting principles. And we see this in the religion known as Zoroastrianism, which is the religion of the Persians. It was a religion that made a bit of a mark on the Jews. It affected their thinking to some degree. Zoroastrianism viewed the world as a battlefield between opposing gods. You had the god of light, known as Ahura Mazda, and the god of darkness, called Angra Mainyu. The great decision in life, according to adherents of Zoroastrianism, was whether to serve the god of light or the god of darkness. Now, the Jews followed this line of thinking, or this contrasting concept, and for many centuries they held the belief that there were two worlds. There was the present age and the age to come. The present age was the evil age, while the age to come was the age of God. And among Christians, the belief was that the kingdom of God had arrived, but not for the world. It had arrived only in and for the church. Thus, Christians drew a contrast. The life of those within the church was the life of the age to come. And the present age represented all those in the world who were outside of the church and outside the kingdom. So the life of those within the church was the life of the age to come, which was good. But on the other hand, the life of the world around it was living in the present age, which was evil. And so now you have this contrast between good and evil, light and dark. Christians, however, didn't hate the world. I mean, after all, it was God's creation. The term that John was using here defines the world apart from God. In the original language, it's the word cosmos, and it means society or culture that is characterized by the wrong principles and false values. The specific world John is talking about is the society of the Roman Empire with its false god and its rampant immorality. It's not the world in general, but rather the world that has forsaken the God that created it. So there's our distinction. But John goes on to mention the striking characteristics of this kind of worldliness. See if these characteristics are not just as present today. You have the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. So John's writing way back when even represents things that are going on in our culture today. Still, it's a problem of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. Those are characteristics that still define our world even today. We might call this worldliness. And worldliness is defined by a fixation on the here and now rather than the future. The worldly individual has no concept of what Paul speaks of in Ephesians 5:16 when he talks about redeeming the times and making the most of opportunities. The worldly individual lives fast, loves hard, and dies young. He or she doesn't realize that clothes wear out, that beauty fades, and bellies grow lean. In his poem, The Clock of Life, Robert H. Smith sums up the emptiness of a worldly mindset beautifully when he writes these words. He says, "The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell just where the hands will stop, at late or early hour. To lose one's wealth is sad indeed. To lose one's health is more. To lose one's soul is such a loss as no man can restore. The present only is our own. Live, love, toil with a will. Place no faith in tomorrow, for the clock may then be still." Worldliness elevates the urgings of the flesh over the teaching of the Spirit. And it could involve many other things besides the three that John mentions. I mean, it can involve being materialistic. It can involve a passion for anything worldly that trumps a love or passion for God. And so the question becomes, are we worldly people? Are you a worldly person? You know, there's a test that you can take to see if you're confused about this. Answer these questions in your mind. Am I fixated upon now instead of then? Is the majority of my time consumed with trivial pursuits like laying up treasures on earth? Do I view life as an endless playground of thrills? Is my spiritual livelihood an afterthought? May we never invest so much in this life that we go bankrupt spiritually. In verse 17, John wrote, "The world is passing away, and also its lusts. But the one who does the will of God lives forever." You know, in his powerful sermon, Homesick for Heaven, Jimmy Jividen said this: "Would you purchase a home for $10,000 that you knew would burn down in a year? Would you invest $10,000 in a stock that was guaranteed to lose money? Would you pay $1,000 for a bull that was already dead?" Of course you wouldn't. Those are horrible investments. And so it is investing in the worldly. That's a terrible investment. It doesn't pay eternal dividends except eternity away from God. So don't invest in something that is worthless, that doesn't give a good return. That was Demas. Demas invested in the worldly. We don't know a whole lot about Demas. He's a rather obscure character that's only mentioned a few times in the New Testament. We see him in Colossians 4 and 14 as well as Philemon 1 and 24. Paul refers to him as a fellow worker. But apparently, Demas had a love affair with the world that he couldn't shake. And in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 10, Paul writes, "For Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica." We're not exactly sure what happened to Demas, only that it seems that he tried to have one foot in the world and one foot in the kingdom, perhaps. Whatever the case may be, he seemed to be tethered to the world, and he just couldn't shake it. And eventually, he goes back and leaves the work of the Lord for worldliness. I want to ask you tonight, who is your Demas? All of us know of a quitter, don't we? All of us know someone who started out running the race so well. They burst out of the starting blocks. They were running to finish, and then they drop out of the race. Whatever happened, we don't necessarily know. Maybe they had some disappointment with God. Maybe there was a tragedy, and they blame God. Whatever it is, maybe it's just good old-fashioned complacency. Whatever it is, they dropped out of the race, and they quit running. All of us know somebody who came to church, they got baptized, and they never darkened the doors of the church again. All of us know of a Demas, somebody who used to be a faithful worker, but has since gone back to the world. What are we going to do to help them? You see, we often picture the lost as those who have not heard the gospel and need to obey it. I mean, the New Testament presents the lost in another way too, doesn't it? Remember Jesus talking about in Luke chapter 15 about the one sheep that goes astray? I mean, if we are to be like Jesus, we go after that one lost sheep, and we seek to restore it. We seek to bring it back to the flock, right? What do you do with the Demas? Well, I don't think it's any different than what you do with any person who is lost, whether they were once a Christian or never a Christian. I think you try to lovingly teach them the gospel, to refresh their memory on what they have given up and what they have lost, and try to urge them to come back and pluck them from the flames of hell. I mean, we want what's best for them, and so we should seek them out. You know, we often, like I said, look at the lost as people who have never heard the gospel, but the lost are people who are away from God. Even if they once knew the gospel, even if they once obeyed it, even if they once followed in Christ's footsteps. Sometimes the situation calls for tough love. Sometimes it calls for a harsh rebuke. Whatever it may be, we seek to save that which is lost, and that includes that one that used to be faithful. Maybe you're somebody's Demas. If you are, I'm glad you're here tonight, because that's a great first step. But maybe somebody has looked at you to say, that's my Demas. That's the one I'm going to go after. That's the sheep that has gone astray, and I'm going to do my best to bring them back to the flock. If you are somebody's Demas, I want to encourage you to get back in the race. Don't invest in the worldly. Invest in the eternal. You know, at the close of 2 Timothy, Paul writes these words to the young minister. He says, "Make every effort to come to me soon. For Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for service." Paul's letter to Timothy obviously was for encouragement. Timothy was beaten down. He was discouraged. He may have been ready to throw in the towel. I don't know. But throughout the letter, Paul is trying to motivate Timothy to press on. And we see this very clearly in verses 6 and 7 of chapter 1 when he writes, "For this reason I remind you to kindle afresh the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and discipline." So Paul is encouraging Timothy to persevere, to keep your head up, to keep fighting. Preach the word, he tells him. Be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. But I want you to take special note of the words I read a moment ago as he brings his letter to a close. Make every effort to come to me soon. For Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me and gone on to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for service. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but you can almost see Paul here saying, are you going to be a Demas or are you going to be a Mark? Which one are you going to be? Are you going to be useful in service to me like Mark? Or are you going to be a deserter? You know, I think that's a question for all of us. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here tonight. But will you be a Demas? Will you be a Mark? You know, if we choose Christ, we'll have heavenly riches, but certainly we'll have to endure hardship. We're going to give up some things that may seem appealing in the world around us. But the choice is ours. We cannot afford to make a bad investment here. With earthly investments, we may lose money, but with eternal investments, we lose our soul if we're not careful. We've got to make certain that we're making the right investment. Think about that when you think about your Demas. And think about that when you think about your life, if perhaps you're someone who was running so well but dropped out of the race. I want to ask you to seriously consider the price that was paid on your behalf so that you wouldn't have to. You know what the one sign that people pay the most attention to is? I mean, there's a lot of signs in our world, right? All over town, you have speed limit signs, no loitering, no skateboarding, yield, stop, all those kind of signs. But you know what sign that researchers tell us people pay the most attention to? Out of order. I mean, that's what they say. And we know that out of order is a sign that has a pretty negative connotation, right? That's not a sign that we are pleased with when we see it, because typically it's on a machine or something that we want to use, but it's lost its functionality and we can't use it, and so therefore frustrates us. Out of order means that something is amiss, that it's not functioning properly. Do you ever get the feeling that sometimes workers just slap an out of order sign on something because they don't want to fix it? Or maybe that it's probably an easy fix, they just don't want to mess with it, so they slap an out of order sign on it? Get the feeling some Christians do that too? That they hang an out of order sign on their heart because they don't want to invest in the eternal any longer? Maybe they feel they've done too much wrong to ever be forgiven. Maybe they feel like that there's just no way up for them, that they're in rock bottom and they can't get out. Maybe they feel trapped in this prison of self-loathing and self-deprecation. They can never be better. That is a sign spiritually that we shouldn't pay attention to. It means that something is amiss, that something is not functioning properly, so I guess in that way we should heed it, but we need to be able to quickly remove the sign and be able to move forward. We need to be willing to take off the sign and get back in the race. And as Christians, we need to be willing to go out and meet those people who have an out of order sign on them and be willing to try and to restore them, seeking to save that which is lost. Unfortunately, there's a lot of Demases out there. What are we doing to help them get back in the race? And if you are somebody's Demas, I want to encourage you to get back in the race. If you have a need tonight that we can help you with, as we said, if you're a Demas, don't leave here tonight without being restored. If you're someone that needs the prayers and support of this church family, then let us help you. Whatever your need is, come now as we stand and as we sing.
Had it not been the Lord who's on our side.